All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you again for joining us for this OCD SoCal conference on this Saturday afternoon from wherever you are. My name is Keith Ramachandran, and I struggle with OCD, depression, and major anxiety disorder. And this is my lovely wife, Erin, and we're also joined by two very accomplished people today, Doctors Michaela and David McCulkin. And we're so thankful that David and Michaela, that you could join us. So I'm going to just set the stage for what you can expect today. But before that, the purpose of this particular talk is for us to share with you, for the four of us to share with you how OCD can impact a marriage or a committed relationship. What are the impacts? Now, these impacts can range from sex and intimacy, impacting sex and intimacy, to financial aspects, to how you function in daily life, how connection is impacted. So these are some of the things we're going to be briefly touching on. In terms of what to expect, we're going to go into, after I get done here, we're going to go into a time of introductions where each couple will get about 10 minutes to introduce themselves and share their story, how they first met, how OCD came into the equation, and how it has impacted the relationship, and how it has impacted financial aspects, connection, and so on and so forth. And then after each couple gets done sharing their lived experiences, we're going to go into a time of questions and answers where you, the audience, will get to hear from you. We want to keep this as a dialogue and not just a one-way monologue. So we want to hear from you as well in terms of what you heard, what you thought about it, and also questions that you may have based on your own struggles. You may be in a marriage or a committed relationship, so we want to hear from you in terms of what your challenges are and the questions that you have for us. Some topics that we're going to be touching on in terms of the questions are OCD and functioning and stress for the spouse or partner, treatment and resilience, healthy choices, what can be done in order to live with OCD in a healthy way, and also how OCD impacts sex, intimacy, and connection. And then we'll basically end the session. So that's basically a lay of the land in terms of what you can expect from today's session. With that, I'm going to pass the mic on to Michaela, and she'll lead us forward.
Great. Thank you so very much, Keith. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're joining us today. Sky's the limit. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Just make sure that you're chatting to everyone. If you end up just chatting with just one other person, we won't see your questions, unfortunately. So we wanted to just start out by introducing ourselves as couples, kind of talk about our journey with OCD. I think it's amazing to hear the different stories, especially in our keynote speech earlier today, that we're all struggling. We all have our challenges. And we still struggle daily. Just even yesterday, we were having a conversation about a cycle Dave was having. So we may not have all the answers, but we have some tips and tricks that we'd like to share today to hopefully help you out as well. Dave and I have been married for almost 27 years this summer. We met, I had just started college, and we met at church and started out as a friendship and blossomed into a relationship. And then, of course, marriage. We didn't know that OCD was in our marriage until about year 7. So you can only imagine that you're starting your married life. Things are different. We didn't live together before we were married. And so you have those challenges. But then when you have OCD layered on top of it, that's a whole nother challenge. So Dave will talk a little bit about his career in the military and kind of some of his struggles.
Sure. So like Kayla said, when I met her, I was in the beginning of my military career in the Army. And it was a structured life. I don't think that was a coincidence in retrospect. But way before that, even when I was a kid, I knew I had what we called in my family uncommanded thoughts, and just challenges with ideas, thoughts that I couldn't get out of my head. And I knew that was not normal, but I didn't know what to do with it. And nor did I know how to label it. And so by the time I was in high school and college, I just took that as the norm. And that actually, in a way, helped me succeed by focusing on checklists, by having attention to detail, becoming a pilot in the Army, using checklists. It worked pretty well for a while. But then it also, like Kayla was saying, by year 7, it also had an impact on our relationship, something I hadn't experienced before. And so the challenge of dealing with that, and especially in a community profession that Shannon talked about before, where there really is a stigma, or if nothing else, an organizational, institutional barrier to seeking mental health in some regards, that was a challenge that we had to face. And so we were at that crossroads at year 7 in our marriage. We had to make a decision.
So we had tried counseling at church. We had tried marriage retreats because we thought there's something wrong with our marriage. And it was, and I look back at my journal entries now before we found out we had OCD in our marriage, and I realized just how much stress there was. So as Dave said, being in the military, there's this whole stigma. If you receive help, then you're going to get, it's going to be put on your record, and then people are going to see that. And we'll talk a little bit about treatment later, but we had to have that hard conversation of, okay, if we start to get help from the military and Dave starts to take medication, that means that he probably won't be able to fly anymore. So that was a major career impact. We used, when we first found out that we had OCD in our marriage, and that Dave had the OCD, I remember looking at the therapist and crying and saying, he's broken. and just, I mean, that's all I could say. And I feel really bad about that. We laugh about it now, but it was really, really hard. Dave would, before we realized, well, at the very beginning of our journey with OCD, Dave felt like if he didn't tell me everything that happened in a day, that we would get divorced. And so he would write every minute detail of his day on a little piece of paper. And sometimes, and we called them bullet points, and sometimes I think you'd have 35 to 45 bullet points for a day. And I would have to sit on the couch as he briefed me and listen to every bullet point. And if I interrupted or if I asked a question about it, he got really agitated and would have to start all over again. Which sometimes could be up to an hour. So, that was an accommodation that I was doing that I realize now wasn't good for us. We also had problems with, Dave has scrupulosity. That's one of his parts of his OCD. And so we would be in a public place and Dave would start laying hands on my head and praying over me, because he felt like if he didn't do that at that point, that our marriage would be over. Just a lot of little things that when we realized we had the diagnosis of OCD, we had to really hit head on. Something that's helped us is a lot of humor. We have named Dave's OCD.
We call him Herb, for lack of a better term. But it's literally, it also recognizes the fact that it's kind of like having a third person in the marriage, in a sense. It gets in the way in the times, in our relationship and our intimacy, as we'll discuss. And so but the ability to label your enemy has kind of a power to its own. Another thing Michaela was talking about is that one of the things we really felt is, especially once we were diagnosed, it was nice to be able to have that name, that diagnosis. I could now seek treatment. That's all well and good. But for her, there weren't too many resources, and there still aren't for those, especially the partner in the relationship, becoming now the caregiver and now having to face this also, often alone. And so it's good to see that forums like this are addressing that.
And I think with Herb too, it took a while for us to build that trust. And once again, when we talk about treatment, we'll describe that journey a little bit. But it took a while for Dave to truly trust that when I said you're doing it, that he truly was doing it. Because once you're in a cycle, it's hard to stop that cycle. And he used to get very agitated, almost angry when I would say, you're doing it. Well, you're just making excuses. You're just telling me I'm doing it, so I'll stop. well, no, you're doing it. And so it made it easier for us. I could say, Herb, you need to stop. You need to leave the room right now. And it kind of helped a little bit. Dave was deployed a couple of times in his military career, and we would joke about leaving Herb like in the mountains of Afghanistan drinking tea. Just he can just stay over there. We can get rid of him. I think one of the crucible moments in our relationship was when we were both working on our PhDs, and Dave was working on his dissertation on it was an autoethnography, so a study of his life and all, I think, 25 journals that you had kept growing up, and kind of looking at that journey of his own OCD without knowing that he had it. And I remember your dissertation defense was extremely hard and emotional on you, because it was your first time just kind of coming out and saying, that's right, everything
in public. And that was probably one of the most difficult days of my life. And especially because you weren't there, you couldn't be there. And so, yeah, it was tough.
So that's kind of our starting point. We're open to any questions that anybody might have, but we want Keith and Aaron to have their opportunity to tell their story as well. And then, of course, we'll open up to questions.
Thank you, David and Michaela. Thank you for sharing. It is amazing to hear your story and also to hear how accomplished you are, and all that you've accomplished, not just professionally in your careers, but also in your marriage, despite OCD being in the equation. So thank you for sharing your story. Honey, you want to start us off?
So Keith and I met through friends, and we really fell in love and really got married to really serve other people. We actually traveled to India together and just really were excited about our marriage. And what ended up happening is, after we got married, and Kayla really talked about this, about stress. We had the stress of getting married, stress of moving, stress of a new job change. Keith had some trauma with his family. And basically, when we got married, within 2 weeks, he was spending more time cleaning than he was with me. And so it was something that he didn't know about and something that I didn't know about. So we went from feeling loved and so excited about our future to recognizing that something's not right in our marriage. And in that first year of marriage, it got so bad that he was cleaning up to like 12 to 16 hours a day. So you can imagine where someone's really not functioning. And we even had a circumstance where he went to jail on our first Valentine's Day. And you can imagine how traumatic that was for us both. And
this was due to a fight that we got into as a result of my struggle with OCD. And Aaron got really upset because I wasn't prioritizing her. And so we got into a verbal altercation, and somebody ended up calling the cops, and I was arrested. No charges were pressed, fortunately, but I did spend 5 days in jail. So we look back on that with humor now, but at the time it was extremely traumatic.
Yeah. So, we basically had not the typical first year of marriage. From an expectation standpoint, I thought we were going to get married, have this happy life, and it would all be joyful, especially in the first couple of years of marriage, since we didn't have any kids. And it ended up being really difficult. And so at our 11th month, again, I didn't know what OCD was. Keith didn't know what OCD was. I was talking with my mentor, and she said, "You guys keep talking about OCD. Maybe it actually really is OCD." Because I would ask questions like, how long is typical for cleaning the floor? How long is typical for putting dishes away? Is a couple hours typical? And why don't you talk about, at the 11th month, I basically said, "Keith, you have a month to go to the doctors." And within that, he'll pick up the story about being diagnosed.
So I was diagnosed within 2 minutes of having gone to see a marriage and family therapist. And this was after Aaron had given me ample amount of time in order to go and get myself examined, get my head examined, I like to say, and find out why is it that I was doing these things that were extremely impairing my ability to function, my ability to show up to work on time, impinging upon our marriage. And so I was diagnosed within 2 minutes of having classic OCD. And my subtypes are checking, order, caring too much about symmetry, cleanliness, mental compulsions, doing mental ruminations, things of that nature. Let me take a step back and say that before all of this started, I was functioning, but I did not grow up in this country, having been born and raised in India, where things of such nature are not even talked about. They don't ever see the light of day because mental health issues are a taboo. They're never talked about. In this country, it is becoming more the norm, and mental health challenges are being more openly spoken about today, and they're more accepted. And we still have a long way to go. But at least it is okay for you to go and seek professional help, to go and see a therapist, to go and see a psychiatrist, to take medication. But in India, these things are taboo. If you go and see a psychiatrist, it means that you've gone off the deep end and you need to be locked up in a psychiatric ward. And so these things were never talked about. Growing up, Dave, you mentioned making a list of several things that happened during the day and talking to Kayla about them and not having peace until you did them. I can relate to that. Growing up as a child, ever since the age of 10, that's when I see and I look back and I see the onset of OCD. I would have terrible anxiety every time I came home from school. I would have to memorize all my lessons perfectly, narrate them perfectly to my mother, and I would have terrible anxiety. If I went out of the house, I had this magical thinking that if I went out of the house, whatever I had memorized would just magically evaporate and I'd have to do it all over again. And if my mother veered away from listening to me, I would have terrible anxiety and I would get angry and upset. So I can totally relate to what you went through. And so that's when OCD really began. And OCD spikes every time there are life stressors. So when I came to this country at the age of 21 in order to pursue graduate studies, I remember living with roommates and I would have to clean everything perfectly. And I would have terrible anxiety if somebody came over. And then that spiraled into our marriage when somebody would come over or Aaron would have somebody over. I would spend up until 3 or 4 in the morning checking things, cleaning things in the kitchen. So every time there have been life stressors, OCD has spiked. And we're at the stage today where I'm actually in between jobs right now. It was just 10 days ago that I was laid off from a job that I thought that I would have for a long time to come, but I experienced corporate layoff and I was laid off. And so I'm having to manage all the stressors of life and having to not give into compulsing and manage my struggle with OCD. So we're not cured. There is no cure for OCD, as you may all know. We have to learn to live with it and manage it and function in a way. You may all have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind. I think I'll close with that. In the movie, John Nash, actually Russell Crowe, who portrays John Nash, who's a real life mathematician and received the Nobel Peace Prize, had to learn to live with these images that he would see. And he struggled with, I believe, schizophrenia. And so he had to learn to live with them and not listen to them in the end. And so that's really, there is hope. If you're struggling with OCD, there is hope. OCD doesn't have to have the final word, but the burden is upon us to be able to manage that and to be able to not allow that to impinge on our lives in marriage.
Yeah. So if I were to wrap up we talked about how we met and then the diagnosis and where we're at now. So Keith went from 12 to 16 hours a day of doing compulsions to now he's about to 1 to 2. He's been able to work a stable job. And, for me, I've been able to get my own health where I'm not being codependency. I know how to put up healthy boundaries. I know how to be able to connect with Keith and we have fun as a couple. And now we want to give back to the marriage and mental health community. So, you came to this talk because you're either married or in a relationship. And what David and Kayla and Keith and I want to say is you can have a beautiful relationship despite OCD being in it, but it requires both people doing the work that they need to do individually and then the work being done as a couple. And there's no magic pill or magic formula. And a lot of times we use the words, it's messy, it's beautiful, and it's hard. So it's messy. It goes up and down. it's beautiful when you figure out how to work together and you just have these amazing moments and you're like, I'm so glad I didn't give up. And it's hard. Some days are so hard. I bet Kayla and I can talk about how many days we've cried, we felt alone, and we wanted to give up. And so we want to encourage you today, and hopefully through the questions that we share, we've got some canned questions, but also the ones that you're going to put in, that you can, in your own relationship, know it's messy, it's beautiful, and it's hard, but there is hope and you can have a beautiful relationship. So with that, Kayla, I'm going to turn it back over to you
Sure.
to talk through some of the canned questions.
Yeah. And Sandra, I saw that you had your hand raised. If you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, we'd be happy to address it. And Pat, you're right. And we'll get to your comment in just a minute, because yeah, OCD wants to rob you of every joyful moment that you have. So I completely understand that. So talking a little bit about stressors, and Keith, you brought up, stress, and when stress comes up, everything gets amplified. Can you all address a little bit more about those stressful times, the stressful days, and how you handle the OCD that's in your relationship?
Typically, I handle stress more in a maladaptive way than a healthy way. Whenever there's a life stressor, whether it be a job loss or whether it's just routine run-of-the-mill stress, I typically resort to, and it's almost an unconscious switch in my mind, I resort to giving into compulsive behaviors. Typically, it will be something like checking something or making sure something in my immediate environment is in control. And I've learned over the course of the years that it's extremely maladaptive. Not only is it reinforcing the negative neural pathway in my brain and reinforcing OCD and strengthening OCD, if you will, but it also is keeping me from doing whatever it is that I need to do on a healthy basis. And so I have learned that when my wife, who has now been by my side for 15 years and weathered the storm, she knows full well when I'm giving into this monster. I have learned that when she prompts me, she's doing it not because she doesn't care about me or she wants to take something away from me, but actually because she cares about me and she loves me and she wants me to get better. And in the moment, win this little battle with OCD. So I have learned to listen to her, to defer to her. And so that is one technique that I will use. Like even just before we started, I was running late because I was checking to make sure my closet was tightly closed. And so she prompted me and she said, will you please get over here? And so I learned to listen to her and defer to her and stop what I was doing and come, although it's extremely hard to do. So when there is stress, for those of you who are listening, my encouragement to you is to go to healthy techniques, healthy stress management techniques. It could be deep breathing. It could be stopping right in your tracks and understanding that you're giving into OCD and that is strengthening the OCD, just making that mental mind shift. And I'm conceding that it is extremely hard to do. Dave, I think, mentioned this earlier when we were talking about this. It's like stopping a sneeze in the middle. So it's extremely hard to do, but that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And then for the loved one, the spouse, what I do is I call it go back to the basics. So when we're in a stressful circumstance or crisis, what I do is make sure that I'm eating, sleeping, exercising. For me, I'm a person of faith, so prayer is incorporated in there. And I try to remove other extra things in that time of stress, and look to places of joy. Kayla, how about for you and David? How do you guys handle stress?
Well, stress is just a part of life, and isn't that the truth? And during our stressful situations, it's a lot of that. You came up with a great word for it: the emotional bank account, the relationship bank account, where
Bank of civility.
Yes. Oh, thank you, bank of civility. I remember you saying that. Go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Essentially, it's like Aaron said, going back to the basics. It's especially in OCD relationships. I think we found that everyone knows the importance of being respectful and honoring your partner, but it's ever more so important in OCD because we don't realize everything that comes out of our mouths, every way we respond to a situation, we can't stop once we do it, and that was true even before internet. our sound waves from our mouth keep on going forever. And so being deliberate in a healthy way of when you tell your loved one, I love you, thank you, I'm sorry, and meaning it, can really have a long-term impact, and over time build up what we call that bank of civility, that way of building that trust and that commitment, so that when times are pretty bad and tough, you have that reserve almost. And so you're not starting at ground zero. You have at least some buffer built in already, and it becomes easier over time in that sense. But please, I'm sure Aaron and Keith would say the same thing. This isn't a cakewalk. We're not here because we're success stories. We're here because we want to share what we've lived and experienced, because we're telling you things that we wish we heard when we were just starting out with this. And so just sharing the story is a powerful way to do that.
And just, I want to add real quickly that, I mean, talk about stress. Aaron and Keith are aware that my dad just died. And I thought, oh no, what's it going to be like? Because Dave's OCD is very selfish. And I thought, oh, it's not going to be good, because I have had to kind of split myself between two places. And Dave, I think because we've worked so hard, it doesn't mean we're perfect, doesn't mean we haven't had our days, but it's made it easier for me to split myself between two places to help out. And I want to talk a little bit about treatment. Keith and Aaron, you talked about I would call it a huge success story, that you went from multiple hours of cleaning to 1 to 2 hours a day. Can you talk a little bit about your treatment that you've been working on?
So treatment has been a lengthy road for me. I have gone through 3 intensive outpatient programs. 2 of them actually with the Gateway Institute that is based here in Southern California, and I would highly recommend them and the treatment program, their exposure and response prevention, along with the cognitive behavioral therapy treatment that they offer, which is an intensive outpatient program that lasts over 3 weeks. I have done it twice, and then one treatment program that I did was in Northern California in Sacramento. Yep. So treatment has been a lengthy road for me. And treatment is not just something that you go and pursue with a psychiatrist or a therapist. For those of you who struggle with OCD, you know that this is a day in and day out daily battle. Treatment is something you do on a daily basis. ERP is something that you just don't give up on. You have to do ERP every day. Yeah. Somebody once said, if there are 2 dogs, a good dog and a bad dog barking at you, which dog gets stronger? I guess it's the one that you feed. And so that's the same way with ERP and OCD. You feed ERP will get stronger. And over time, even though it is bloody hard to do, over time, it will become easier to do. But you feed OCD, and the OCD is a bully. It takes and takes and takes. There is a saying, there is a proverb in the Bible which says, the leech has 2 daughters, and they're both called give and give. And that is what OCD is. OCD is a leech. OCD will keep taking and taking and taking. And so treatment is something that you do on a daily basis, not just something that you see a therapist once in a while and pay money to do. It's something you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and the treatment from a standpoint of, you might say, well, why didn't you just do it once and he's fixed? Remember, Keith was undiagnosed for 18 years. 18 years. So do we think he's going to be fixed in one season? No. I struggle with my weight. Do I just know what to do and then I'm fixed and I never have a weight problem again? No. Every day I have to think about what I eat. Every day I have to think about, and I go up and down. And when the idea is, when you're struggling, you get help again, right? And that's the idea. For me, I also had to seek treatment. I brought in emotional baggage into the relationship. I have had things that I've had to work through. So I had to learn boundaries, codependency techniques, and different things. I've learned over the years, and someone told me this and was very helpful. I think therapy is very valuable. And if your therapist is not helping you within 4 to 6 times, it's not the right therapist for you. So just like with Keith, he needs to have a therapist that's ERP for OCD. For me, as someone who was working through, past or current things within 4 to 6 visits. And then we've also in seasons had to do couples therapy. We'll talk about later about sex and intimacy, but that was something that affected us. And for many years, I was so shameful about it and wouldn't feel like we could even talk about it. And after I got out of denial and was like, we need to talk about this and we need to get help. And we were able to work with a therapist to help us in that area. And so I want to encourage you that it is okay to get help for both people. And the idea is you want to think about what keeps the relationship healthy. And Keith is not worse of a partner in this relationship because he has a condition. Just like if I had cancer, I wouldn't be worse of a partner. But that cancer would affect the relationship. So OCD affects the relationship. And we are both, as a team, fighting this together. One of the turning points in our relationship for treatment was when I said, I feel so alone in this. And Keith turned to me and he's like, I feel so alone. I was like, wait, you feel alone too? He's like, yeah, I feel alone. So turning from alone to togetherness is one of the catalysts that helped us get on the right track. So David and Kayla, what was your treatment progress like?
Well, I think it's important to pick a therapist who has background with OCD. We went through multiple therapists before we finally found somebody who truly understood and had practiced, and we still see her to this day. For us, it was important to have couples therapy, but then it was also important for me to have my time and Dave to have his time with our therapist, and then she could kind of collect information, and then that helped us when we were together. I see some questions about medication. Is that part of our treatment? Absolutely. Dave and I decided that medication was important to help to just kind of keep it under control. And we had to find different
medications. And really, similar to Keith, I know I had OCD since I was young, but I wasn't diagnosed till I was in my late 20s, and the severity of my symptoms and so forth, even though I had some high function, it pretty much means I expect to be on medications most of the rest of my life. And that's something I realized and accept.
And then we found the booster, what we call the booster. So there's
Right.
another medication on top of what he takes for his OCD for when he's really feeling the cycles coming on. We call it his booster. And he's trusted me enough to know when I say you need to take your booster,
Right.
He'll take it. So that's helpful. Another thing that we have taken part in is the ERP. Dave had what we called the uncommanded thoughts. He would think that he was going to push me down the stairs or stab me with a knife, which, when you don't know that you have OCD, you're kind of has some shocking things to be said. And so what Dave would do is, the internet was just coming on, but we had a small tape recorder, and Dave would say the things in the tape recorder that he wanted to do, all those uncommanded thoughts that he knew would never happen. And I told Dave, you're not gonna actually take part in these. I don't think you're gonna kill me, otherwise I would be gone. But we had that trust that he knew I would not try to listen to his tapes. I didn't want to listen to his tapes. I knew what I heard, and I didn't want to hear his tapes. But he would do that, and then he would listen to them, and so that was a big part. I don't think you don't feel the need to do that as much now. But the other thing was, I told you about those brief lists that could take up to an hour, and so Dave started to email me his brief every day. You don't do this anymore. You're down to 3 now, bullets a day, which is great. But he would email me everything throughout the day, but he never knew if I actually read the emails or not. So, but that was my choice. I could just skim over it, and he had just spent 2 hours on it, or so. But those are some things that we've done on top of the medication. So those are some things for treatment. Let's talk a little bit about the healthy choices, boundaries. Erin, I know you talked a little bit about boundaries that you've needed to put in place. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Yeah, Chris Tronson talked about it, and also Kevin Foss about time management. And time management can be a challenge with OCD. So you can imagine as a couple, you want to go do things together. You might want to go on a date, or you might want to go to a party, and OCD can get in the way where we'll be late. So what I've had to learn is that Keith knows time is very important to me. David, being in the military, probably very important to you as well. And in the Indian culture, it's not as much of an importance, right? And so we've got cultural barriers in place too, but Keith knows time is important for me. So if it's something we need to be on time for, I will leave without him sometimes. I will, we, a couple seasons in our life had only one car because we just enjoyed driving together. And I told him it's too stressful for me because I feel like I'm being controlled by the disorder, and us having a second car allows where I can leave and you can drive, and I know that you can meet me there. So just little things like that, but those little things are actually huge things in regards to my emotional well-being. And also if I get elevated to anger or rage, to allow where I'm not getting to that state, because I have choices, he has choices. If he chooses to give into compulsions, I can choose to leave. And we have an agreement that even though he might feel like I'm abandoning him, I'm actually not, because we've already talked about it before what that boundary is. How about for you guys? What kind of boundaries have you put in place?
I smiled when you said leaving if Keith's not ready, because I've done that to Dave too. I figure as long as it's safe and everyone's safe, and you're not leaving someone at a rock concert or something like that in an unsafe place. We have what we call Dave time, and Dave knows that I build it in, but I always build in some extra time before we have to go somewhere. There were many times early on when we're first diagnosed that I would say to Dave, I'm leaving I'd give him the time, and he still wasn't ready. And I would say, oh, I'm going now, I'll meet you there. And then, and that's one of the boundaries that I put up. Another boundary is when Dave is cycling, and it happened the other night, as a matter of fact. Like we said, this is still a journey. We are not perfect, but Dave was tired. And when he gets tired, the OCD kind of explodes, however you want to say it. And so Dave was starting to cycle, and he's starting to bring up old arguments that are 20 years old. And I just said to him, I'm done talking about this. We can talk about this tomorrow. I think you're just sleepy right now. And well, yeah, I am. What do you think, Dave?
And on my side, there are boundaries that I can set up too, that we've set up, and that is knowing, the longer you live with this and really reflect on it, the more you can know about it and how it impacts you. And so I can tell at times when I know something stressful is coming up, whether it's like a family event or being out in public or whatever it is, something I know may trigger me, I will tell her, I'll say, hey, I got 10 minutes or I got 30 minutes. And I really mean that. I mean, I'm going to do the implosion thing and probably leave on my own at that point. That's how serious it is. And I try to owe that to her when I can. And for the most time, I can tell her that. And we've had our most serious discussions, if you will, when those times have not been met.
It's true. And when we go to, we like K-State football games, go Kansas State. And so we know that when we go to football games or concerts, that I need to remind Dave to bring his earplugs because it just gets too noisy for him. We have a thing when we go to parties, if Dave's ready to go and it's not appropriate to say, I'm 10 minutes away. We have a code word, and it changes depending on how we're feeling. But usually it's blue, and it's kind of fun to have to put the word blue into some kind of sentence. But that's how I know, okay, his boundary is set. He's ready to go.
And it's all grounded on the fact that, I need certainty, and that translates into inflexibility. And so when you're in a public environment with so many stimulants, and all your senses are triggered, it's sometimes overwhelming. And so that's why we do that and have that conversation. As I've gotten older, I've sensed that I've gotten more sensitive to that.
And I think that goes along with the intimacy piece. And Keith and Aaron, can you share a little bit about how OCD has affected your intimacy between each other?
So this is one area that has severely been impacted due to OCD for two reasons. One, because of the medication that I take, one of the side effects of medication is that it decreases libido, especially in males. And so I struggle with a lowered libido, sexual libido, as a result of the medication. And I have been on medication since 2010. And let me tell you, I have tried a whole gamut of them across the spectrum, different kinds of SSRIs, Celexa, Zoloft, Prozac, Effexor, Seroquel. I am also on an antidepressant now, in addition to being on a high dose of Effexor. And for those of you who take medication, you know that the low dose of SSRIs or antidepressants won't cut it for OCD. You have to take the highest possible dose, and that does a number on your libido. And the other thing that has affected our sexual intimacy is when it's time for us to engage in the physical act, I will oftentimes get distracted or listen to an intrusive thought that I have to go check something or straighten something, and have that certainty that Dave was just talking about. And that just ruins the mood. It affects Erin emotionally in a tremendous way. She takes it personally. And over the course of time, she's learned to understand and filter it, that it's not her. It's not that she's not attractive or that I am not in the mood. It's just that OCD has gotten into the equation and just ruined the whole equation and just completely ruined the mood. And so, needless to say, these twin factors have affected our sexual life in so many ways, so much so that sometimes, let me get down to the nitty gritties here, 2 or 3 months will go by before we've had sex. And that is just absolutely horrendous for a marriage.
And so what we've done is, one, I had to learn that it wasn't me personally, and we had to talk through that. We had to work with a sex therapist. There were some compulsions in regards to fluids, which I think is common with OCD. So we had to work through that, of how to do an exposure with it. And then now we have it where we have a term, Sexy Sunday. So Sunday's kind of the day, and we will plan for it. And sometimes we'll even go to a hotel, and we will make it fun, because it is important for us in our marriage to include that. So what I want, this is a very taboo topic. It's not discussed. The reason why we are vulnerable about it is because we want to break stigma in this. And it is so common when there's a mental health condition in the marriage. And I love, and I mean, how courageous is this man that he'll be willing to talk about it? Like, I just love Keith so much. And I'm just so thankful for you, and that we are really in this together. And so if you're struggling in this area, may you have hope that you can work through this, and you work through it together, just like any other issue. And it's very common. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with each other. So that's what we would say to that. And David and Kayla, you can share in regards to this topic how you would like to.
I think it's very obvious, Keith and Aaron, how much you have worked together on this. And it is so courageous to talk about intimacy, and it is a taboo topic. So it's important to talk about. For us, one of Dave's compulsions, and I'm sorry, I don't know if we mentioned this, Dave is a true obsessive. So he obsesses about all sorts of things. But one thing is looking at women. And so for the longest time, I had to hear, I'll see a handsome man and I'll think, oh, he's handsome. And then he just, life goes on. But for Dave, it's so much bigger than that. Dave would have to share, oh, I looked at this woman and this is why I thought she was beautiful. And it really affected our intimacy, because when you don't feel, and Aaron, you kind of mentioned this, when you don't feel sexy and wanton, it's hard to have that intimacy, and it's hard then to be together with the physical act. We've learned we are very physical people. We've learned that about ourselves. And so much like Keith and Aaron have mentioned, we find that we have to kind of have dates as well, and go out and spend the night at a hotel, have dinner together, and just kind of get away from just the hubbub, the daily life of the house, because there's always stuff that comes up. What would you like to add, Dave?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think and it's important to, again, learn about what OCD is and all. And besides the biochemical aspect of it, there's a cycling, I call it, that's unique to every sufferer, I think. For me, what she was just talking about from her perspective makes sense. It's logical. But my experience, it's not rational at all, but it's very real, and no less real than what she's experiencing, and for me, it's a threat to our marriage. If it comes down to, I've never really learned how to deal with, if I saw an attractive person, regardless of gender, how do I respond to that? And the more I start thinking about it and not having an answer, it starts the cycle. And then it becomes, well, I need to tell my partner, because our relationship's based on trust. And if we don't have that trust, we don't have communication. If we don't have communication, we're going to get our marriage is going to break down, then we're going to get divorced. So it's an immediate, and I'm talking seconds, of a jump from seeing someone who's attractive to we're going to get divorced. And that's real, and that is very painful, but that's why I would lead to those compulsions. So it had nothing to do with sex, had nothing to do with her, but it was very real to me. But unless your partner understands that, or what your cycle is, it's not going to make sense, because it's irrational.
Yeah. And don't you find too, it's the stress is positive or negative. So we find any emotion, like sex is a positive emotion. Like, I'm getting excited, I'm going to be intimate with my partner who I love, but that stress triggers OCD. And then can lead into the compulsion. So it can be the anxiety of fear-based stress, right? And triggers, or the positive. So
that's right. It's the level of the emotional tag, I call it, but you're absolutely right. Yep. The more emotional a tag there is to an idea, no matter how, and especially taboo subjects are perfect for it. And that's why all of my obsessions, there's no one unique category. It's a whole range. Anything that's taboo, the more I'm going to obsess about it.
Exactly. Wow. So neat. I know we have about a half an hour left. So let's go ahead and ask the audience of what questions do you have, and what would be helpful to kind of discuss, or what's been on your mind. Again, we know that marriages and couples is a newer space that people are willing to talk about this. And there's not a ton of resources out there. And so we'd love to, as a community, be in this with you to talk about the things that you want to talk about. So feel free to put those in the chat. And as those,
or you can ask them directly to us too.
Or you can ask.
I saw that Sandra had a question earlier. She'd raised her hand.
Yeah, so let's do that.
Unmute her if she still has a comment. And we appreciate all the comments that everyone has been putting into the chat and the questions, and we will try to address everything. So thank you.
Do you have any advice for when you're having mental compulsions during intimacy?
I can take that one. I think this is a hard one. Mental compulsions can be extremely challenging to resist, especially because they're so intangible, and then they're in your mind, and it almost seems in the moment that the thought has you captive and you cannot let go. I think the only thing that I have done that has helped me is to focus on my senses, focus on what's going on during intimacy, focus on my wife, look into her eyes, feel, touch and feel her skin, maybe touch and feel the bed or whatever it is that you're on as you're doing the act. Just focus on your physical senses and try to get out of your mind. And that has helped me to break that hold that the thought has on me.
Yeah.
So that is something that I would advise.
And to, again, your partner knows you, right? Knows all the good, bad, and ugly. So if you're struggling with compulsions, maybe you might, if you can't get out of it yourself, you might have to talk about it or pause. Or we've definitely had times where you have to start or restart or pause and those sort of things. So I think for the next question, I'll ask this to David and Kayla. What do you recommend if your spouse has OCD, just discovered after age 57, after 20 years of marriage, but isn't interested in treatment? So what would you do if someone's not interested in treatment?
Well, I think it's fair to say that, we were open to treatment, but it took a lot of conversations. As we mentioned before, I mean, it was a big challenge with Dave, with the career path that Dave had taken, to have that therapy. And so I think a lot of it is just that open communication. And I'd say if your spouse has just been diagnosed with OCD, it might just still be so new and scary. I think it might be good to connect with another couple, perhaps, that has OCD. I will say, and I feel like I know Aaron and Keith well enough to know that either one of us as couples would be happy to talk with you, together or, as couples, because there's so much stigma to treatment. But treatment is so important, because I can tell you right now, that I don't know that we would still be together 27 years if we hadn't gone for that treatment. So I think it's a hard discussion, but either talking with other people or just between you two and communicating is so important.
Yeah, definitely. And you remember the story from the keynote about the parent who had to let the child be in the car?
Yes.
And the honest truth with Keith and I've had to set those very hard boundaries on that first year of marriage. I said, you have a month to get diagnosed. Knowing what I know now, I wish I would have gone to the doctors with him, but I have to give grace to myself that I didn't know what I was doing. And then later in our marriage, he was, again, stressful circumstances. He was in his life crisis of his big dream falling through, dream job. And
we were separated.
We ended up separating because I was getting sick. He was down to 130 pounds a day. He wasn't getting out of bed. He wasn't functioning, and it was making me sick. And I was the one who had to keep the stable job. So I basically said, I love you. I want to be married to you, but I can't do this anymore. And I need to separate from you to take care of my own health. And then it took us 10 months and we worked with the therapist, and he did all the hard work. I did hard work. And then we worked to get back together. And so for us, we had to set that hard line. Do I wish we didn't? Yeah, of course. It was difficult. But you know what? That hard line saved our relationship. It saved our marriage. And now Keith has boundaries for me that in order to stay in the marriage, I need to be controlling my anger. I need to be controlling my weight. I need to be, doing the things I need to do. And for him, treatment and medication and managing his condition and contributing to the family, whether it be volunteer or working, is his responsibility. So just really being clear with that. I want to go back to Sandra, because you said, Kayla, that she originally had her hand up. I'm not seeing the hand up, and I want to make sure that we don't miss. Was it SR? Sandra, or was it a different one?
It's with Sandra.
It says Sandra. Okay. So she's not here anymore. Okay. So
that's okay. But I'm sorry to call you SR, but there was a comment about it's hard to communicate with spouse. He is familiar and has gone to therapy with me and alone into these conferences, just hard to communicate simply what is a healthy way or what to do for a significant other when the sufferer is in the middle of a crisis or trigger. Would you all like to discuss that a little bit? So how do you communicate in the middle of what we would call a cycle? How do you help Keith to get out of the cycle?
So here's the way ours works. Say it once, because I noticed it first. Say it again. Say it again. You can hear in my tone. And when it gets to like the 5th time, I'm ready to blow. And when I blow, he hates it and then he moves. And that's not healthy, right? So like I'll say it once, I'll say it twice, and then I'll say, hey, you don't want me to get to rage. I've now told you 3 times. I need you to respond, or I need to remove myself. Sometimes I do good at that. Sometimes I don't. We're still working on this. And yeah, I think the other thing, I saw a question about, what do you do if your spouse is sick of OCD? And I use the analogy of a restaurant. You go to a restaurant and you get sick of it, or you don't like it, right? Do you keep going to the restaurant? No, you go to a new restaurant. You don't stop eating. And so in this case, like with OCD, we love each other. We've committed to each other. We want to be married. And we know this is something we're going to have to continue to fight together. And so we have to talk about it. But some nights we say, tonight, we are not talking about OCD. We are just going to have fun. And I'm sure it's like parents when they go out where they say, I'm not going to talk about kids, right? Because they're kids, or they're not going to talk about work. That's a healthy boundary too. And so we were serving where we weren't really having date night. And so we decided, okay, this is not working. Like, we need to put our marriage first. And so we canceled that. And we said, Thursday night's date night. And so Thursday night is date night. We don't talk about OCD. And again,
most of the time, sometimes it just comes up. So again, be realistic,
right,
that you have to persevere. There's no perfect formula. There is no such thing as a life free of OCD. You have to learn to manage it,
right,
and set aside time, dedicated time for yourself as a couple or the marriage, in order to make sure that the marriage gets priority.
Right. Stephen and Caleb, how would you answer those questions?
A lot of these, I see a common pattern in many of these questions. And it's easy, especially we're at a conference dedicated to OCD. We're all talking about it. We're all here because of our experience with OCD. And that's wonderful, because it's important to remind ourselves that we're not alone. At the same time, it's also important that if you're in a committed relationship, that's the most important thing. And any committed relationship is going to have challenges.
Right.
And some are going to be bigger than others. OCD just happens to be another challenge. And it can also be an opportunity. And so if you treat it that way, not as this behemoth Godzilla creature that's going to eat us up and spit us out, and that's all we have to devote all our energies to it, but rather have an adult conversation about it, and realize that, one, we do have to talk about this. We may not like it, but we do, because it's impacting our relationship. And that's what we realized at year 7. We're heading to the big D if we don't do something about this. We didn't like that, but that was the reality. And so we sought help in our own way that worked for us. And that's the challenge, and keeping that communication up, so that when you get to other challenges, such as, well, I don't really want to take medication, that's a sign of weakness, or I don't want to go to treatment or talk about it with my kids because that's a sign of weakness. How can I take care of them if I can't take care of myself? We hear that mentality all the time. That's something that's worthy to be talked about with your partner. And you may not come to a consensus all the time, and that's okay. But if you don't talk about it, I'm pretty sure it's not going to lead anywhere good. And so that's, I think, the challenge. It's like Aaron said, it's hard, it's messy, but it's also beautiful. And if we hadn't had those challenges in our marriage, we wouldn't be here today, and our relationship wouldn't be as strong as it is.
Yeah. Oh, David, that was so well said. Amen. That was just amazing. So powerful. So powerful. There's a question here, Bree, about children, so we can talk about that real quickly to go back on the last thing. We all can't do this alone, so make sure you have your professional team and your personal support teams. Again, safe people, but we need to know when to call in additional help and to plan for those crises or relapses. So Bree, about children. So Dave and Kayla, do you have children? And talk about that decision.
Well, you want to talk about hard times, and sorry, I might get a little emotional, but I was pregnant once, and we lost the baby. But it was, talk about hard times and trying to be flexible. Dave had just gotten deployed for a year when we found out, and then he was half the world away, and I lost the baby. So Dave was able to come back. We were able to work through that. Fortunately, we had our therapist to talk with too. But we have made the decision at this point to not. God is wonderful. God is great. If we have a child, absolutely welcome the child. But we have decided not to have children. But we're open if God blesses us. But that. Having OCD in our marriage has been a little bit like it's been challenging, and I think that those challenges are too great for us personally to have children. I'm sorry, that was a very long answer and very emotional.
That's a great answer.
Sorry.
And Bree, we're similar. We always thought we would, or Bree, we're similar. Kayla, we're similar. We always thought we were going to have children. I thought we were going to have 4 children. We planned on it. Life happened where we were moving a lot for jobs and different things. And finally, when it was kind of at the age where you've got to decide yes or no, we really talked about it and said, in order for me, I made the decision with him, but it was like, in order for me to stay healthy when you're not healthy, I think having children would put me over the edge. Now I lead a peer support group once a month for spouses walking alongside, and about 60% of the people in that group are parents, right? So just because the 2 couples talking here decided not to have children, that doesn't mean you can't have children. I know many people who have children and they have beautiful stories. So I think it's a personal decision based upon where you and your spouse are. It also, if people know about it sooner and are getting treatment, there probably is a different impact on it in the relationship. Both of us, our stories, it wasn't diagnosed until a long time. And with these conferences, hopefully people are getting diagnosed sooner, and the stigma and getting the treatment, because it is a game changer of having that treatment. Just like in cancer, you would get cancer treatment, right? So same sort of thing, physical illness, mental illness. Okay, next question is your support group open? How can I join? Yes, yeah, it's open. So we'll talk about it at the end, but yes, it is open, and anybody can join. So
and Aaron, it might be helpful if you just typed in maybe your webpage. So that, for anybody, because I know once our session is done, I think it's done and everything will disappear. So
yeah, so
put that in the chat.
Yeah. And so David and Kayla have written a book called OCD and Marriage, and it's fantastic. We've actually been reading it ourselves, and it's been helping us. And then we wrote a book as well on walking alongside the spouse, and then now have a nonprofit called Mental Health Strong, and we have conferences and support groups. So we'll put both of those resources in the chat. And if any of those would be helpful for you all, feel free to check them out. So yeah.
And I would like to say too, I appreciate the support that I keep seeing in the chat about sharing our stories, because it's not easy to share. It's not necessarily a topic at parties, hey, we have OCD in our marriage. And so thank you for all your support as we've been telling our stories today. We appreciate that a lot.
So the OCD and Marriage book by David and Kayla.
And we decided to write the book, and we heard the comments in the keynote about, kind of in the 90s when the internet wasn't as big. So we're researchers by trade. We enjoy reading, and we just couldn't find anything particularly for the caregiver in a marriage. There was a lot out there about OCD, and so that's why we're hoping our story could help others. And I know that Keith and Erin have a lot of great resources out there as well. And Pat, yes, it took us a while to share with our family members, not because we were scared of it or anything, just people have a hard time understanding sometimes. So it took us a while to share. Because
there's a stigma with OCD because of lack of information and ignorance. But you hear OCD all the time, don't you? I just heard it the other day when one of the people in my office was telling someone who's very organized, oh, you have your OCDs coming out. And, part of me wants to state, listen, you're talking to someone here my life was almost destroyed by it. And yet you're nonchalantly mentioning it. But at the same time, it's good for me to realize that it's lighthearted. It's meant to make a connection with someone else. But yet it's just being aware of it and understanding that, it can be a challenge, and it's putting in perspective.
Yeah. So we've got one more question in the chat. I know more will come, and we probably will run out of time for that. So we'll put in our contact information. You can reach out to us if we run out of time. So the next question, how do you share? Maybe you guys take the how do you share with family and friends. We'll take the stress one, and then we'll do our closing questions. So how about that?
Sounds good. So I would say once Dave defended his dissertation, which was about his OCD, it was easier for us to talk about it, because as we mentioned earlier, it was kind of a cathartic moment for Dave in coming out to the world and publishing something that says I have OCD. So that has helped us to talk with people a little bit more. In fact, Monday night, we're talking to a women's group, a philanthropic women's group I belong to, about our OCD. And so that's, talking to a group of people is a little overwhelming, but we're ready to talk about it.
But the only way we could do that and be in that position to talk about it publicly is to have a conversation privately first about what we won't talk about and what we will talk about. So, for example, we won't talk about prescriptions that I receive or dosages or anything like that.
But you take medication.
But I take medication, and that's important, and we'll focus on that. But and then we also, during my dissertation, I went to living family members and asked them, and I shared them my story and asked them what I could and could not share. So I respected their privacy as well. So you have we already vetted what we are going to release to the public, and that was important.
Fantastic. Again, doing it as a team. Mm-hmm. And then the last question, any tips to manage stress and manage the OCD symptoms as a spouse? So yes, that actually is my area of specialty. So I wrote a book on that. And for me, it was 8 steps to help work that through. So make the diagnosis clear, help for me and then my spouse. Set some boundaries, take time for self-care, remember to grieve, own the journey, not again expect relapses, and the gift of mental health. So those are the 8 steps that work for me. And as I talk to people, it seems like when they tell their story, they kind of fit into those 8 steps when you're on this long marathon, beauty, messy, and hard journey together. We wanted to close out to give you guys some hope and just say that as couples and marriages, this is a new community that's getting together to be able to talk about it. There's not a lot of resources for all of us. And so we need to stick together and continue to work together. So we appreciate you spending the time on a Saturday to come and hear our stories, and hopefully you can walk away with something today. But some of the closing questions, David and Kayla, what is the positive about OCD being in your relationship? And what's one piece of advice you would give for couples who might be impacted by OCD?
I'd say in a word, OCD is a crucible. So there are 2 aspects to it. The positive has been that it provides us an opportunity to strengthen our relationship. The negative, of course, is it can break the relationship. But as through trust and communication, we've been able to strengthen our relationship and know each other and ourselves better over time. So I'd say that's the positive and the opportunity that OCD offers.
And I think too, the advice is it's okay to seek help, and you are not alone. We felt so alone at first, but then the more you talk with people and the more you go to your therapist and talk, you realize we're not alone. So stick with it. It's hard, it's ugly, it's messy, but like Aaron said, it's beautiful.
That's right.
And Keith, what would you say of either what's positive about OCD or why we stay in the relationship, or what's a piece of advice you would give?
I think the 2 positives for me are, one, because of my own struggle and the extent and the length of the struggle and the depth of the struggle, I have learned to have a lot of compassion and sympathy, not sympathy, I would say empathy for others who struggle with mental health challenges. I no longer judge them. I am more empathetic toward others because of my own struggles, and I have compassion on them. And the other thing, that the positive aspect that has come out of it is, Dave mentioned that OCD is a crucible, and I want to say that it's a crucible of transformation. Before any pure metal is made valuable, it has to be put in a crucible, and the heat has to be turned on, and it has to be melted, in order for all the impurities to come to the surface. And the same it is with my life. Now, I am a person of deep faith. The object of my faith is the person of Jesus, and I am a Christian. And so I have learned, because of my struggles, that it has taught me to depend like a child, to have a childlike dependence on God. And I depend on him daily for everything that I do. And I know that at the end of the day, I am not alone. My wife may die someday, she will. And if that happens before I die, I know that God is with me, and he will see me through this battle to the other side, to the great beyond. And so it has taught me to have deep faith. And so that is the other positive that has come out of it. And what was the other? The advice that I would give is that it is hard, but there's hope. Don't give up on your marriage just because OCD is in the equation. No matter where you are in your journey, whether it is you're right at the beginning of your diagnosis or whether you're 60 or 80 years old, you don't have to give up. It is never too late. There is always beauty that can come out of the hardship. So find support, seek professional help. Find people that you can trust. Start with your spouse, start with your friends and family. There was a question earlier about how to share this with your friends and family, especially if you come from a culture where such things are taboo. You have to find delicate ways to share this with them. I would not unload all the information all at once. Start taking baby steps, start sharing with them that you struggle with thoughts, you struggle with doing basic things, and take baby steps.
Yeah, and the one piece of advice I would give you is fight the disorder and fight for your marriage over fighting each other. both get the help that you need individually. You're both contributing to the dysfunction in the relationship. Stop the dance or the dysfunctional cycle that may be occurring and break it. And one person can break it, and then the other person will break it, and you can do it. There is hope. And Chris Tronson said that we could offer this as a resource to you guys, but we have a marriage and mental health conference in 3 weeks. It's a 3-hour conference that will just be focusing on marriage with mental health and addiction. So if that's something you're interested in, we put the website in the chat so you can check it out there. So yeah, just know that you are not alone. There is resources coming together. David and Michaela just are inspirational in what they wrote and tackling it as a couple. So thank you for coming. And David, you want to close us out?
Absolutely. We just wanted to thank everybody for attending our session today. It's been truly an honor for you to listen to us, but also for us to share our stories. Again, not to publicize what we're doing, but rather to tell people what we would have liked to have heard when we were starting out this journey, and to offer our assistance in any way. Like we said, we started out without resources, so that where there were no resources, we created them. So some of those resources include the OCD and Marriage book that Michaela and I wrote last year, and you can find it at ocdmarriage.com. And then also Mental Health Strong book, and also a website that Aaron created, and just a tremendous nonprofit organization. And again, like mentioned, the conference on the 21st of May, that will, the Mental Health Strong Conference, that will address many of the issues that we talked about today, including resilience, intimacy, no child solutions, and parenting. And so you can go to mentalhealthstrong.com to register there. But I'd also like to, and I'm also starting a Psychology Today blog, so you can look at that. Wanted to share with you a poem by Maya Angelou, that 2 stanzas from it, that really, I think, gets to the core of what we're talking about in terms of resilience. No matter what challenge you face, it's important to stand and for yourself and your loved one. Still I rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bring the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, you
Thank
guys.
you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.